All right, Matthew. So you have some new scientific evidence for us for the truth of Christianity. And in particular, you've got up on the slide here, Eucharistic miracles, a solid argument for Catholicism. First, before we get into the presentation, tell me why this is sort of, new-ish. Because these things are still happening, right? These Eucharistic miracles are happening even to this day. Well, tell me a little bit about why this is new scientific evidence for the truth of Christianity.
Yes, well, thank you, Cameron, for inviting me to talk about this subject. I think it's fascinating new evidence for the truth of Christianity because these are new phenomenon that have been analyzed by science at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, and throughout church history, we have had a lot of Eucharistic miracle reports. But today we have scientific confirmation of these miracle reports. It's not just hearsay or testimony. We could actually verify it through the scientific lens of the modern era, which makes it more rigorous than what we used to have. So this is why it's a subject that's very interesting and that is exciting to study. And I've been motivated by Dr. Franco Serafini, who wrote the most extensive book on Eucharistic miracle with the most rigorous scientific analysis. He's a cardiologist, and he wrote this book in 2019, I believe. It came out in English in 2021. So if you guys are interested in the in-depth scientific evidence for Eucharistic miracle, this is the book you should buy. I've met Serafini myself. We've given conferences on Eucharistic miracles in France, and he has given some in Italy because he's Italian. And so this is a subject that has been interesting to me in the last several years.
So I want to just kind of prep the audience for what you guys are about to see in this video if you watch the whole thing. So we're going to go through a presentation where Matthew is going to lay out. Do you have 5 that you're going to go through?
Yes, I'm going to go through the 5.
The same 5 from your debate. So he's going to lay out 5 Eucharistic miracles and then talk about the science and everything and how it confirms the truth of Christianity. And I just want to tell you guys that this stuff is actually mind blowing. I was listening to a debate that Matthew did with a guy named Kevin Non-Trad. What is his?
Non-Trad-Cath. Yeah.
Non-Trad-Cath. So he did a debate on Eucharistic miracles. Matthew did recently. Actually, it was just a couple months ago. But their debate was really, really good. And Matthew had his opening presentation. I was actually blown away by how much evidence there is for these Eucharistic miracles. So, with that said, let's just jump right into the presentation, Matthew. So feel free to start your slideshow.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. So today I'm going to talk about Eucharistic miracles, which I consider to be a solid argument for Catholicism. So let's start with a definition. So a Eucharistic miracle, we could define it as a supernatural event occurring with consecrated host, most often characterized by the transformation of that host into human flesh. Given the extraordinary nature of this claim, a skeptic may wonder, well, did these miracles really happen? How can we be sure it's not a hoax? So these questions are entirely valid, and I would say that one should not be credulous when faced with such events. So I distinguish between good skepticism on one hand and bad skepticism on the other hand. So what do I mean by that? Good skepticism means not believing things without good evidence and demanding serious evidence to confirm that a Eucharistic miracle has actually occurred. Bad skepticism, on the other hand, would say that, well, miracles are impossible and no matter the amount of evidence, I will never believe in them. I would say that a good investigator must strive to begin his inquiry without any preconceived bias or ideas. The problem is that many atheists on internet start from the conclusion that God does not exist and that Christianity cannot be true, and from there they conclude that Eucharistic miracles must necessarily be false without even beginning the investigation. Of course, this bias exists amongst certain believers who tend to see miracles everywhere because they are already convinced of the truth of Christianity. So how do we conduct a truly honest investigation? I would say a rational approach must be neutral from the outset before any investigation begins, and so we should not presume that the miracle is true, certainly, but neither should we presume for it to be impossible to be true. Only the evidence matters, and it must be examined rigorously. One must be willing to be objectively convinced by the best arguments. And I hope that skeptics, acting in good faith, will agree with me on this point. So, that being said, let's start the investigation. Before we start, just one thing. What if Eucharistic miracles were false? Would that be a problem? Actually, that would not be a problem because if Eucharistic miracles were false, it would not change anything about the Christian faith. The central reason why Catholics believe that Jesus is present in the Eucharist is because Jesus taught it in John 6:48 to 58 and in other passages of the Bible, not because of Eucharistic miracles. So our faith doesn't depend on Eucharistic miracles for it to be true. It depends on Christ's authority and his words. However, if at least some Eucharistic miracles are true, then they provide a strong and even striking argument in favor of Christianity and particularly Catholicism, I would say. This is why there is a genuine interest in studying these phenomena from a rational and scientific perspective. Okay, so as you know, there have been lots of Eucharistic miracles that have been documented throughout history. There have been approximately 136 that have been documented by Carlo Acutis, who has just been canonized by the Holy See. So he was one of the young saints of the 21st century, and he documented a lot of these Eucharistic miracles throughout history up to today, but he died in 2006. And since 2006, there have been even more Eucharistic miracles that are even more well attested. So we're not going to be able to look at the 136, of course, that would take too long, but we can take a look at 5 Eucharistic miracles that have been analyzed by science and that you can find in this book, Franco Serafini, a cardiologist examines Jesus. So the first one is Lanciano. So Lanciano is probably one of the most well-known Eucharistic miracles. It allegedly happened in the Middle Ages, so the 8th century, middle of the 8th century. The story goes that there was a priest that was celebrating Mass, and he did not believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. He had a lot of doubts about this. And so during Mass, he saw that the consecrated host started to transform into real blood and real flesh. And he screamed it was a miracle. He showed it to the entire church. The assembly saw it was a miracle. They started crying to God, thanking God for this wonderful, marvelous sign. And since then, the relic of the host has been kept in Italy. You can see it on the screen. And it has been kept for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, up until the 1970s, where finally the Vatican authorized a scientific study on the host to confirm if it was really authentic or if it was just an old legend, an old story. And so for this scientific analysis, they called Dr. Eduardo Linoli, who was a professor of anatomy, histology, and clinical microscopy. He was also the head of service at the Hospital of Arezzo in Italy. And so he began his work on the host on November 18, 1970. So they were at the church with the bishop, lots of eyewitnesses, and he took the host and then he took it to his laboratory to start the scientific studies. And you can find his scientific study, his scientific analysis that has gone in depth. You can find it on PubMed. So PubMed, for those who don't know, is the National Library of Medicine where all the specialists, doctors, scientists publish their works online so that they can be seen by the academic community. And so you could just type Linoli on PubMed and you'll find his article from 1971. You can also find all the scientific and primary sources in this book that I have. So I have access to the primary sources. You can find it online also if you want. And so here are some pictures in Italian of the primary sources describing what Linoli found. So of course, this is Italian, not English. I have translated this in English. So his conclusion after studying the host in March 4th, 1971 was that the miraculous flesh was real flesh composed of striated muscle tissue from the myocardium. So the myocardium, for those who don't know, is a part of the heart, right? And he also noticed that the miraculous blood was actually real human blood, and this was shown through the chromatographic analysis he did. Also, he did immunological studies that showed that both the flesh and the blood were human in nature, and they belong to AB group type blood. So, there are different blood groups in human blood. There's A, B, AB, O, and this was AB group. And we'll talk more about the significance of this AB group later. He also showed that the proteins in the blood of Lanciano were normally distributed just like in fresh, normal human blood. And he showed that there was no histological section that revealed any traces of preservatives previously used for embalming. So no kind of preservation. It was just kept in this church for hundreds and hundreds of years, but no special type of preservations on the host. So here you can find the scientific analysis described in French, and you have some pictures on the right of the host. So I mean, it's 1970. The technology was not as good as now, but you still have some black and white pictures of the host, and you can see some part of the flesh of the myocardium. And so we could say there's an impressive preservation of the host. The fact that the host has been kept in a vessel for hundreds of years does not explain its preservation. The vessel did not block any air or bacteria from coming in. So one would expect to find a decayed piece of bread, but that's not the case. And so Linoli was very rigorous in his analysis. He even did some percentages on the blood of Lanciano and the percentages of normal blood when it comes to albumin, globulin, etc. You can see on the screen, on the middle section is the blood of Lanciano, and on the right you have the normal values that you find in human blood. Here are some more analysis when it comes to studying the calcium, the magnesium, and all other molecules present in the blood. And so that he did 10 samplings, different samplings, and he compared it to the blood of Lanciano, so very rigorous analysis. And here you have some authentic pictures of the primary sources, and you have the scientific article that was published with these pictures at the bottom right of the screen here, that was published in Italian. So you can find all these primary sources in this book if you want to go deeper. So here are more pictures of black and white. And so Linoli, it's important to tell that he was not alone in this investigation. Some people say, well, it was only Linoli's opinion. He did that on his own. That's actually not true, right? So there was another professor called Ruggero Bertelli who helped him and confirmed the results. So Linoli said in 1971, I must add that this opinion, so his scientific analysis, is shared by Professor Ruggero Bertelli, Emeritus Professor of Human Anatomy at the University of Siena. The histological aspect detected in the tissue, although altered by time, are absolutely objective and reliable. And you can confirm this with a letter that was signed by Ruggero Bertelli. You can see on the left that was signed on February 27, 1971, confirming this in Italian. So Linoli was not alone. And there was a second test in 1981. Most people don't know about the second test. The Franciscan requested a new analysis on some unused sampled from 1970. And so, again, the findings once again showed that it was human heart tissue from the myocardium. And Linoli observed myocardial fibrous cellular structure, the inner membrane of the heart, so the endocardium was present, and there was blood vessels. And according to Linoli, the flesh had undergone cadaveric rigidity, which means that it was alive at the moment the miracle occurred. And so this was seen by Linoli in his second scientific analysis in 1981. So you can see here on screen some pictures of the myocardium, the endocard, and other tissues, blood vessels. So this is all in French, but you get the idea. And Linoli said it was very probably from the left ventricle. So he gives us even more details in that analysis. So in conclusion, for this first miracle, we could say that Lanciano is a scientifically solid case. Linoli's approach was very rigorous. He included control samples to ensure the validity of the results. He was an honest scientist who did not hide the challenges he encountered. He even mentioned some negative results for tests he did, so he was very honest in his methodology. His analyses were published in a reputable scientific journal available on PubMed, and it was confirmed by Professor Ruggero Bertelli, as we saw in 1971, and by another analysis in 1981 on other independent samples. So there's only one objection to the Lanciano case, is that the first documents mentioning the miracle dates from the 16th century. But that's not a solid objection because that doesn't matter. We know that where the host is from the 16th century onwards. And so we know that it has been preserved for many like at least 500 years. So even if we suppose that the miracle occurred later than the 8th century, like in the Middle Ages, that wouldn't change much, right? It still has been preserved for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's the fact that the first source that dates from the 16th century does not really change the rigorous scientific analysis that have been done on the host. Okay, let's go to the second case.
Before we move to the second one, can I just ask a sort of general question about these Eucharistic miracles? So it's not as if the entire piece of bread turns into flesh, right? There's only parts of it that sort of transform. Is that typical throughout these Eucharistic miracles?
It depends. So for the Lanciano case, it is reported that the piece of bread changed into flesh and blood. But for other cases, it's only parts of the host that has transformed into myocardic tissue. So as we will see later for the Sokolka case, for the Buenos Aires case, Legnica, it's only a part of the host that has been transformed into flesh and myocardic tissue, and the rest has kept being bred. So it depends from the cases, but from Lanciano, from the historical testimony, it says that it was all transformed in flesh.
Okay, so that actually raises an interesting question with Lanciano. Is that the right way to say that?
Lanciano.
Lanciano. Okay, so if that one is completely changed, then couldn't they have just taken a piece of someone's heart and then said that it was, a consecrated host prior to that?
That's what I talk about after when I analyze the hoax hypothesis. Could they have taken it from someone else's heart? So that will be analyzed later in the presentation if you're interested.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. We can save that objection for a little bit later.
Yeah. Okay, and so now let's go to the second case, the Buenos Aires case, that happened at the end of the 20th century. So most people don't know that for the Buenos Aires case, there's actually 5 Eucharistic miracles that took place in 1992, 1994, and 1996. And so the most well-known, of course, is 1996, but there have been some scientific study done on the 1992 miracle, notably from Dr. Sazot, who studied the blood and found real human blood on the host that had been consecrated in the 1992 Mass in this little church in Buenos Aires. And she could even give you the leukocytaria formula with the percentages of basophils, monocytes, lymphocytes. So I don't know how to translate everything from Spanish into English here, but you have the primary source, the primary document on the screen. Here is translated in French in terms of percentages. So you have almost compared to the normal human blood values in percentages, you have the normal values you find in human blood on the right column section. You have for the 2 cases, 1st May 1992 in the first column and 10th of May in the second column. And as you can see, it pretty much matches the normal values you would find in human blood, except for the lymphocytes that are notoriously superior in the cases of the Eucharistic miracles of the 1st and 10th May 1992. So how do we explain that it's above the normal value? Well, Serafini explains that this is what happens when someone is under severe stress and has a form of stroke. And so this can lead the lymphocytes to go up in the body. So he explains that in detail in the book. He gives all the scientific reasons for that. But as you can see, for the other elements, it pretty much matches what you find in normal human blood. And here is the official primary source that was signed by Dr. Sazot. So you can pause the video and see on the screen that she gives, again, the leukocytaria formula, and she signs the documents on October 29, 1995. So this is all approved in official documents. But what's more interesting, perhaps, is the cases that was studied in 1996. This is why the miracle of Buenos Aires is so well known. It's because of this 1996 case. So it happened on August 18, 1996. A host fell to the ground during Mass. It was placed into the tabernacle. And on August 26th, so approximately a week later, the priest came back and found that the host had become red. And he informed Bishop Bergoglio. So Bishop Bergoglio, as you all know, became Pope Francis later, but this was at the time where he was still Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And so he was informed that there was a miracle, an alleged miracle in this church. And about a month after waiting, the host was placed in distilled water and remained there for 3 years. And it was only in July 1999 that Bishop Bergoglio finally authorized scientific analysis of the piece of Eucharist. And Dr. Castañón Gomez, who was a former atheist and an expert in biochemistry and neurophysiology, began his investigations on September 28th with the bishop's approval. And so he was helped by two other guys, Mike Wilsey and Ron Tesoriero. Mike Wilsey is an Australian TV presentator, and Ron Tesoriero is a lawyer. And so both of them helped Castañón during the investigation. And so Tesoriero was filming everything. This is why we have so many pictures from Buenos Aires and so many videos, is because he had a camera and he could film the rigorous scientific procedures. So you can see on the screen the different pictures that were taken when they took the sample to send it to scientific studies, to labs. And so they didn't want to tell the origin of the sample to the people they were going to send it. So as you can see on the bottom right, the sample was not named Eucharistic or Eucharist or things like that. It was named 26 de Augusto, 1996, Muestra Nueva, and the time it was collected, 5 de October 1999. And so that doesn't give you the indication of the identity of the sample, just the dates, so that it wouldn't influence any bias in the scientists analyzing it. And so they first sent it to Forensic Analytical Lab in California because they wanted to do DNA tests. However, the results were a bit disappointing because they didn't get DNA, the genetic code. They saw that there was a low concentration of human DNA that was recovered, but no genetic profile. All the PCR and STR tests failed to give a genetic profile. So this was a bit disappointing to not get the DNA. However, they wanted to get more evidence to see what could this host be. If it didn't give us DNA, maybe it could give us something else. And so they sent it in the following years to doctors like Dr. Lawrence, who was a specialist in tissues, human tissues, and he confirmed on camera on December 7th, 2000, that there was white blood cells that were still alive on the sample. So you can see on the screen, on the computer, he can see the white blood cells. And this is normally impossible because the host has been kept into distilled water for more than 3 years. And normally, distilled water is very hostile to life, so you cannot maintain life in distilled water for such a long time. So that was in itself very, very impressive to the investigators. And so here you have more pictures of Dr. Lawrence studying it in his lab, and he shows the white blood cells on the screen. And then while refining their investigation, Dr. Gomez's team continued to show the samples to several other scientists in the subsequent months and years. And they sent the samples to some doctors in Australia, Dr. Peter Ellis from the University of Sydney, Dr. Thomas Lloyd, Dr. John Walker, also from the University of Sydney. And finally, they sent it to Professor Linoli, who studied the host of Lanciano, as we saw before. And they asked him what it could be. And you can see on the screen, he looks at the slides, and he said it could be heart muscle tissue. But they wanted to have a definitive answer on this. And so they contacted the most well-known expert on the heart at the planet at the time, which was Dr. Frederick Zugibay. They wanted to make a final conclusion which could be definitive, and therefore they asked him, who was at the time the chief medical examiner and cardiologist at the Columbia University in New York. And they asked him because he had 30 years of experience, numerous scientific publications, and over 10,000 autopsies to his name. So he was very, very reputable at the time in 2004. And so they met him on April 20th, and we have Tesoriero filming the interview with Zugibay, and Wilsey was interviewing Zugibay during that time. And so you can have the interview, the video of the interview, if you go on YouTube, go to the channel Reason to Believe, and you can see around the 8-minute mark, Dr. Zugibay under the microscope seeing what the host actually was, without knowing that it was from a consecrated host. They only told him after that. And so here's what he saw. So you can see the white blood cells on the left side, and this is very similar to what you find in a normal myocardium when you have a stroke. You can see on the right side the comparison between the two. And Zugibay under the microscope, when he studies it, he speaks directly on camera, and he says, "I'm an expert on the heart. The heart is my business. This is flesh. This is flesh from heart muscle tissue, myocardium from the left ventricle, not far from a valvular area. It is the muscle that gives the heart its beats and the body its life. This heart muscle is inflamed. It has lost its striation and is infiltrated with white blood cells. White blood cells are not normally found in heart tissue. These cells are produced by the body, and they escape from blood and infiltrate the tissue to address trauma or injury. The heart of the person from which this tissue has come has been injured and has suffered trauma. The blood supply to this heart has been compromised, resulting in necrosis, destruction of the parts of the heart muscle. This heart has suffered." This is not unlike what I see in motor vehicle accidents cases when CPR is applied to a person too harshly and the heart suffers injury. It is also the sort of suffering that I see in cases where someone has been severely beaten around the chest. So that's very impressive that he can see that by studying the host while not knowing that it comes from a consecrated host. And so Mike Wilsey then asked Zugibay on camera, and what do the white blood cells indicate? And Zugibay responds, "They indicate injury and inflammation. There are many, and they're all intact. White blood cells can exist only if they are nourished by the body. The heart was alive at the moment the sample was taken." And Ron Tesoriero further asks Zugibay, how long would these cells remain alive if placed into water? And Zugibay responds, "White blood cells cannot exist outside the body because they are nourished by it. White blood cells normally disintegrate after a few minutes or at most a few hours after removal." So this was very impressive to what Zugibay, to what Tesoriero, Mike Wilsey, they heard this from Zugibay, and it's after that they told him, well, this comes from a consecrated host. And Zugibay was very surprised, and you could see his reaction on camera. And he wrote a letter the year after, so they came to see him on April 20th, 2004, and a year later, in March 26, 2005, Zugibay writes a letter in his name where he confirms what he saw on camera, so you have official documentation. And so this official documentation was sent by Dr. Castagnon Gomez to the future Pope Francis, at the time Cardinal Bergoglio, on March 17, 2006. So you can see them on the screen here together. And you have the final report in Spanish by Grupo Internacional para la Paz that describes all the scientific investigation that had taken place on the host. And you can see the final results in the official language of the city, which was Spanish. And so all of this points, of course, to Christ's suffering on the cross, to his passion, the fact that Zugibe saw someone who had been beaten severely around the chest, and a heart that has suffered trauma. This, of course, as Christians, makes us think of the Passion of Christ, and it's even more impressive that Zugibe did not know where the host came from before studying it. So, another miracle is the one of Tixtla that occurred on October 22nd, 2006, so only a few years later, in this church in Tixtla in Mexico. So here's a summary of the facts. There were more than 600 people who were participating in a weekend spiritual retreat led by two priests, Leopoldo Roque and Father Raito. And there were two nuns who were helping to distribute the communion. Suddenly, there was Sister Areli Marucan, one of the two nuns, who turned pale and rushed back towards the altar in tears and talked to the priest. She showed Father Raito the ciborium in which a host had suddenly become stained with blood. And you can see it on the right. You have the ciborium with the host that had blood on it. And Father Raito exclaimed out loud, "It's a miracle, it's a miracle." And then he showed the congregation the host. And you can see on the right, Father Raito showing the Eucharistic miracle to everyone during Mass. And so here are more clear pictures of the events, official pictures. And so in the following weeks, there was a bishop, the bishop of the diocese, who started to set up a commission of inquiry. There were, at the time, 17 sworn testimonies that were made by different people, all in agreement, attesting that they saw the Eucharistic miracle during Mass. 3 years later, the scientific investigation was launched thanks to Dr. Castañón Gomez and his association. And Castañón Gomez described the bishop of the diocese as someone who was fairly balanced, not naive, but he was somewhat skeptical, like the good skepticism I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation. While he remained open to a supernatural explanation, he was in no rush to recognize it as a miracle in his diocese. His main concern was to establish the factual reality of this miracle. And so on October 27, 2009, Dr. Castañón collected 3 samples of the host, and his association then turned to various specialized laboratories in forensic medicine, immunochemistry, and genetics. So he went to Mexico, Guatemala, Bolivia, and in the US, and he sent the samples for scientific studies. Each time, the result was repeatedly and independently confirmed by different researchers under blind conditions, meaning without disclosing that the samples came from a host. And so you can find the presentation of the result, the official presentation. It's on YouTube. It's in Spanish, and it dates from May 25th, 2013. But here's the official video where they present the results in Spanish if you are interested to go deeper. But here's a summary of the findings. They saw that there was human blood that was found on the host. That's not surprising. That's what they saw at the beginning. So real human blood. The sample corresponded to heart muscle suffering trauma or a heart attack. There was the Dr. Marco Blanket Aña, who was the cardiologist at the Nuevo Hospital in Colombia, who stated that the person to whom the heart belonged had undergone a heart attack or significant physiological stress. You have also the laboratory GenX in Bolivia that confirmed that there was hemoglobin, so blood, and a protein, hemoglobin, which is a protein found only in red blood cells. So, of course, confirming blood independently. And the blood was also tested to be AB group. So it's the same as Lanciano. Remember, in Lanciano, they saw there was AB blood. And here in Tixtla, there was also AB blood that was tested. 2 separate laboratories, the Corporativo Médico Legal in Mexico and GenX in Bolivia, demonstrated the presence of these AB blood through immunohistofluorescence and other scientific studies. And so the GenX laboratory also determined that the RH was negative. So you can be AB, RH positive or ABRH negative. And here it was negative. For the Lanciano case, they did not study the RH, they just studied the blood group. But here we have even more detail, RH negative. And here's the official primary source, the official documentation. You can see on the right that it has been confirmed ABRH negative, and it was signed by the laboratories in Bolivia. And here are more primary sources in Spanish. As you can see there's 4 different documents that have been published. And what's very impressive in these studies is that for the Tixtla case, they show that the blood came from inside the host. So there were 2 separate studies following different methods that showed that the human blood came from within the host. So in 2009, there was Dr. Lazo who showed it, and in 2010, Dr. Perez. And so the 2010 analysis by Rodriguez Perez, nearly 4 years after the miracle, he came with, he was a digital imaging expert, and he came to Tixtla with a high-powered digital microscope with visible and UV lighting, and he demonstrated the ongoing presence of fresh blood on the stained portion of the host underneath the coagulum. So this is very impressive. This shows that it was not placed there by a fraudster. It came from within the host itself. So if you try to fake it by putting blood on the outside, it wouldn't work like that, because here we show that the blood comes from inside the host. Furthermore, they could see that there was white blood cells that were alive even 3 years after the miracle. So remember, the miracle took place in 2006, and in 2009, the study showed that there was white blood cells, which is very impressive, and it's exactly like in the Buenos Aires case. And one of these blood cells, the macrophage, was even observed under the microscope that eating debris. So you can see it here. There's a big macrophage that was captured on the microscope for the Tixtla case. So in conclusion, we can say that the conclusion of Tixtla are as much impressive as the Buenos Aires case. They were made by independent scientific laboratories under blinded conditions, adding additional strong testimony to the reality of these Eucharistic miracles. And so that's a very strong case, I would say, for Tixtla. And we have also the Sokolka case. So that's 2 years later, October 12, 2008. So again, another independent case in another country with other doctors. And so we're in 2008 this time. In this church, we have a Mass going on Sunday, October 12th, at the 8:30 Mass of St. Anthony of Padua Church. You have Father Philip Zodrowski, who drops a host without noticing it. He picks it up, but since it is dirty, he follows the standard procedures, and he places it in a small bowl of water. And that day, the host is put in the church the tabernacle to keep it safe. And a week later, on Sunday, October 19th, at 8 a.m., you have the sacristan Julia Dobrowska, who opens the tabernacle and finds the host that is partially covered in a red-like substance. And so she's surprised, and she immediately calls the priest in charge of the church. The bishop is quickly informed, of course, and asks for the host to be secured. And again, on January 7, 2009, so like a few months later, the bishop requests the host is to be removed so that there can be further scientific examination. And so here you could see the relic of the Sokolka case that has been taken on camera. And for this scientific study, they took 2 renowned experts. So 2 renowned experts from the Białystok University in Poland, who were chosen to perform the examination. The first one is Stanislaw Sulowski, who is a renowned professor from the Department of General Pathomorphology. He has 286 scientific publications that are recognized by PubMed. He's an expert in immunohistochemistry of neoplastic tissues. You have also the second doctor, who is Maria Zobaniak-Lotowska from the Department of Medical Pathomorphology. She has 115 scientific publications on PubMed, and her main expertise lies in hepatology and pediatric gastroenterology. So these are like two well-known experts in Poland for scientific studies. I mean, just think of how many publications on PubMed they have. That's huge. Like 286 publications on PubMed is just enormous. And so they were at the top of their scientific careers, and they took them to study this Eucharistic miracle. And so they both studied the miracle independently of each other, so not consulting each other, and they came with the same conclusion that it is heart muscle, or at least of all living organic structure, it's the one that mostly resembles heart muscle. And they said that the fibers show centrally placed nuclei, segments, and delicate microfibrillar formation with disintegration. So this shows a sign of suffering or damage. And I would say what was the most impressive is that it's impossible to fake. The heart muscle fibers and the substance of the host were intrinsically intertwined. So as you can see on the picture on the right, you have the heart muscle tissue and the host, which is bread, that is intrinsically intertwined to each other. So it's not possible to fake it, because you would have to make the substance. There's the substance of the bread.
You have to weave them together somehow.
Yeah, you have to get them linked together, and there's a degree of microscopic interpenetration of the two substances that cannot be manufactured by any kind of human instruments. And so this is the arguments that convinced Dr. Lotowska of the supernatural aspect of this events, and that it cannot be fake. And finally, the fifth case is the Legnica case that happened in 2013 in Poland in another church with other priests. Once again, you have the same type of event happening. A host falls during Mass, it's put into water, and then you have a red-like substance appearing. It is sent to laboratories. So at the time, it was Dr. Barbara Engel, who was the head of cardiology in Legnica, and she was a member of the study commission that was set by the bishop of the diocese, Bishop Chichi. And she explained that there was 15 samples that were taken from the host in presence of numerous witnesses. And there were also control samples that were prepared from non-consecrated hosts, and they were taken from the same production batch, so that you could have a real comparison between the two. And then you had the final results that were presented in a press conference a few moments later, and the analysis revealed the following things. First of all, they found microscopic they used microscopic examination that revealed that the heart muscle, there was heart muscle with clear signs of fragmentation and suffering under UV light with orange filter. They saw that the images closely resemble to the ones we previously saw in the Sokolka case. And they did immunohistochemical testing that showed that there was traces of human nuclear and mitochondrial DNA that is sufficient to document its human origin. And the histopathology department of the Faculty of Medicine of Pomerania announced that there was striated muscle fiber fragments in cross-sections that were discovered in the histopathological images of the tissue samples, and that it strongly resembled human heart muscle with the presence of alterations frequently observed in cases of agony. So very similar to what we have seen before. And so here you have photographic evidence of the fibers of myocardic fibers with signs of fragmentation that was observed in Legnica. You have photographic evidence here and also here. I could talk now about the blood group, because I talked about the AB group for the other cases. Now that the 5 cases have been examined, it's important to say a word about the AB group. So as you know, there are four categories of human blood groups that are possible in the world. The most well known is group O. It's about 40 to 45% of the world population. The second one is A. Group A, 35 to 40% of world population. Then it's group B. And finally, the rarest group in the world is AB. and AB, the percentages are from 1 to 5%. So you have only like 1 to 5% chance to be AB if you pick someone randomly in the world. And when you do scientific tests on old tissues like Egyptian mummies, you mostly get type groups that are type A or type B, but you very rarely get group AB. So there was a study done on 54 Egyptian mummies that were discovered in Chile, and they did some testing of the blood. And as you can see on the screen, on the right, you have O, B, A, B, A, B. It's very rare that you get AB successively because it's the rarest group in the world. And what's very impressive and what Serafini shows in his book is that when you look at the Christian relics, the Shroud of Turin, the Swordom of Oviedo, the Tunic of Argenteuil, and the Eucharistic miracles of Lanciano and Tixtla, well, every time, as you can see on the screen here, every time in these 5 independent tissues, you always get AB, 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 AB. There were like 15 different tests done on these 5 samples, 5 independent tissues, Lanciano, Tixtla, Shroud of Turin, Swordom of Oviedo, Tunic of Argenteuil, with different methods, different scientific methods, absorption elution, immunofluorescence, mixed agglutination, absorption inhibition, flow cyclometry, reverse grouping, and these tests were documented by Serafini in this book. And as you can see on the right, it's always AB, AB. For Tixtla, you even have the result that's more precise, as we said, AB, RH negative. And so that's an impressive coincidence, right? And so you could make some calculations, right? The probability of obtaining 5 times in a row AB type blood, if we take the conservative stance that the probability of being AB is 5%, so 1 chance out of 20, well, if you do 1 chance out of 20 to the power of 5, you get 1 chance out of 3,200,000, which is very, very small. Compared to this, the probability of being struck by lightning is 1 in 15,300, according to American statistics. So you have much more chance of dying from lightning than from getting 5 times in a row on the random tissues, AB type blood. And since we have also the negative RH in Tixtla, the probability even goes down further, I would say. Now let's talk about DNA, because people make a lot about what does the DNA say. As we said, for the DNA, the results are not as well are not as impressive because they don't give you the genetic profile. It's mysterious. When they try to do DNA tests, no genetic profile comes up. There was low concentration of human DNA that was discovered for the Buenos Aires case, as we saw. And for the Tixtla case, there was also some part of DNA that was discovered by Dr. Lazzo, but no genetic profile could be detected, and that's very mysterious. So the general STR tests don't react normally. On the left, you can see what a normal human profile looks like when you do STR DNA tests. And on the right, you can see what was tested in Tixtla when they did the DNA test. And you have something that's completely out of this world. You have something that's completely not normal. And so the theological explanation that Serafini gives is maybe God wants to not reveal too much. Maybe God does not want to reveal Christ's DNA, for example. Maybe if people knew Christ's DNA, we could start cloning Jesus Christ, and that would be problematic. So for some reason that is known to God alone, God has not chosen to reveal Christ's DNA. So it's a bit disappointing for us, but we need to take the results as it is. We have sufficient evidence based on the AB blood and the myocardic tissue to say it's a miracle, even if we don't have all the DNA. So here's a general summary of all the evidence we have seen in this presentation. In the cases of Lanciano, Buenos Aires, Sokolka, Tixtla, Legnica, each time the host has turned into a heart muscle tissue. Whenever the blood group was investigated, it was always AB, the rarest on Earth. and the DNA is present, but the genetic code is unreadable, and the samples do not react to normally STR testing that cannot produce a genetic profile. So that's the summary of the evidence. Now I could go, if you want, to skeptical objections to scientific miracles. So I would
to
say,
Eucharistic miracles, and
yeah,
specifically, okay.
Yeah, skeptical objections to Eucharistic miracles. So, if I were an atheist, how would I respond to this kind of evidence? And I would say that skeptical objections to Eucharistic miracles often, I'm not saying always, but often presuppose the truth of atheism, which maintains that miracles are impossible a priori. And I would say if someone holds to that position, that would be ideological dogmatism. Unless unless someone is able to demonstrate God's non-existence and refute all the arguments that have been put forward in favor of his existence, we must at least remain open to the possibility of a miracle and consider a priori that probability of miracle is strictly superior to zero, as long as we have not demonstrated God's non-existence. Furthermore, a skeptic has to propose a plausible alternative explanation accounting for all these independent events that strikingly resemble the Passion of Christ. So just like on the resurrection, if a skeptic wants to reject the resurrection as a miracle, he has to provide a plausible alternative hypothesis, like, I don't know, hallucination, lying, things like that. So you have to propose an alternative. It's not sufficient to say, oh, I don't believe it. You need to actually propose a plausible scenario that accounts for the evidence. And so what if you reject a Eucharistic miracle? What do you have to do? So there's two possibilities if one rejects a Eucharistic miracle. You either have to hold to a misidentification hypothesis, that they were honestly mistaken, or you have to hold to the fraud hypothesis, they deliberately deceived us. So what do we say to the misidentification hypothesis? So I would say that some skeptics have proposed that the evidence we see is caused by a bacteria called Serratia marcescens, which is a bacteria that contaminates the bread and causes red pigmentation. But so this is proposed by Dr. Kellikers in his article published online. He says, although not regularly verified, contamination with the bacteria Serratia marcescens has been suggestive as a causative agent for the appearance of fresh blood on the communion bread. I would say that the misidentification hypothesis is not credible for many reasons. First of all, doctors, cardiologists, pathologists, are perfectly able to distinguish a bacterial contamination from an agonizing heart muscle tissue. Saying otherwise disrespects their credibility and training. Scientists from different countries with different specialization came to the same conclusion 5 times out of 5. You get myocardic heart tissue that suffers trauma. This cannot be a simple confusion with a bacteria. And Dr. Serafini says in his book,
can bacteria have like white blood cells moving around actively?
Well, no, bacteria is not compatible with white blood cells. So that's also a point to put forward, is that the bacteria cannot survive with white blood cells in distilled water for 3 years. So I mean that's goes against the misidentification hypothesis. So Dr. Serafini in his book, A Cardiologist Examines Jesus, he deals with the objection of misidentification hypothesis, and he writes, in the reader's best interest, it should be clarified once and for all that any microscope, even the one they gave me as a present for my first communion as a child, can deliver justice after all this nonsense. A colony of red-shaped enterobacteria indeed looks completely different from striated heart muscle tissue. Even in the first year of medical school, in any histology course, students are taught about distinguishing the different tissues of the human body. Being unable to distinguish bacterial contamination from an organized tissue means failing grade. It's like if a pilot with 30 years of experience were accused of being unable to tell apart a runaway from a potato field when landing his plane. So Serafini makes fun of people who hold to the misidentification hypothesis, saying like, well, you guys just think doctors are stupid, they have no training. Even like in the first year of medical school, could distinguish that with my microscope. And it's like if you accuse a pilot of not being able to tell a runaway from a potato field. I mean, that's what he does every day, landing planes on runaways. So you can't just like attack all the credibility of all these doctors in different countries at different times, at different places, studying the sample with blind testing. I mean, that's just not credible at all. So, therefore, it's clear that the misidentification hypothesis in each of these 5 independent cases cannot be a viable option. So this leaves us with a general fraud. So if you want to hold that Eucharistic miracles are false, you have to hold to a general fraud. That's not credible either for many reasons. It would require a team of evil fraudsters substituting the samples with agonizing human heart tissue, preferably from the left ventricle and sometimes with AB blood, giving it to different independent scientists without any of them ever admitting any deception. It's not credible to think that a fraud has been perpetrated by evil Christians who could have orchestrated in these 5 independent cases a hoax that could have happened in different countries at different periods of history. So we could look at each case individually to show why a fraud is not credible in each of the 5 cases. So for Lanciano, I would say it's impossible to fraud. That's what Linoli says in his scientific documentation, because he also tried to see if the fraud hypothesis was possible, and he said, supposing that the heart has been taken from a corpse, I affirm that only an expert in anatomical dissection could have obtained a uniform slice of a hollow organ cut tangentially to its surface, as demonstrated by the predominantly longitudinal course of muscle fibers bundle visible in several places in the histological preparations. Furthermore, if the blood had been taken from a corpse, it would have deteriorated rapidly due to autolysis or putrefaction. Linoli says that a fraud is not possible in the case of Lanciano, and the host had been kept in the vessel for hundreds and hundreds of years. So, I mean, if there was a fraud in the Middle Ages, as you say, he could have detected it because he says that it would have deteriorated rapidly due to autolysis or putrefaction. So even Linoli takes the fraud hypothesis away from the Lanciano case. Then there's the Buenos Aires case. Could there be a fraud in the Buenos Aires case? So some have considered the hypothesis of a conspiracy orchestrated by the investigators Ron Tesoriero, Mike Wilsey, and Ricardo Castañón Gomez. According to this theory, the 3 investigators were under the influence of the false mystic Catalina Rivas, and they supposedly brought Dr. Zugibe a fake sample to analyze. However, even assuming that they lied and they deceived everyone for several years, which remains to be proven, how can we explain Dr. Zugibe's exclamation on the video when he says the heart was alive at the moment it was taken? And how can we explain the presence of white blood cells that Zugibe clearly saw on the microscope, which cannot survive outside the organism for more than a few minutes or few hours? So even if you kill someone and you take a suffering heart tissue, you send it to Zugibe, how can the white blood cells still survive? You would have to do that very quickly. It's very impossible. Can we really
it's not as if heart tissue is just like easily available to the public.
Yeah, you'd have to go to a hospital to ask some heart tissue. They would have to give it to you, and then you would have to run to Zugibe's office to make him analyze it quickly. So what I say is that, can we really imagine evil Christians removing a piece of inflamed heart muscle, preferably from the left ventricle, and run to Zugibe's office, hoping that the white blood cells are still alive at the time of the analysis? I mean, that's not credible. Who can honestly believe that? And how can we explain the fact that Dr. Lawrence also observed the presence of living white blood cells 4 years earlier in 2000? Another stolen inflamed heart muscle with white blood cells, did they do that twice? I mean, come on, that's not possible. It's very, very improbable. So I would say that this seems to be a desperate explanation in order to dismiss the miracle a priori. Now, for Tixtla, is it plausible to think there was a fraud for Tixtla? I would say for Tixtla miracle to be a fraud, the team responsible for delivering the samples to various doctors blindly would have to find AB type blood, the rarest blood in the blood group in the world, as we've seen, and they would have to place this blood on suffering heart muscle tissue that they've also stolen from somewhere else. And even if these fraudsters had managed to find a piece of suffering human heart muscle with white blood cells and the very rare AB group, this is already very hard to imagine, it still wouldn't explain why the analysis revealed that the blood came from the interior of the host. Now remember, it comes from not from the outside, from the interior of the host. So it's physically impossible for a forger to make blood come from inside a piece of bread that's only 1 millimeter thick, right? So even if they wanted to fraud, they could not manage to do it physically. And also, we could say the DNA analysis refutes the fraud hypothesis. As we saw, the DNA analysis does not give a genetic profile. So if it was a heart muscle tissue from someone else they stole in a hospital, they would get the genetic profile of the person to whom they stole the heart, right? And so it wouldn't show things like that where there's no genetic profile that comes up. So actually, the DNA analysis, the fact that it does not give a genetic profile, is actually evidence that it's not a fraud. And so it becomes evidence in favor of the miracle. How could Legnica be faked? Well, for the Legnica miracle to be a fraud, a team of fraudsters would have had to bring 15 different samples of dying heart muscle tissue to different universities, while also preparing control samples to deceive the scientists. It's very hard to imagine. It's possible, but it's not plausible or probable at all. How could you fake Sokolka? As we've said, for Sokolka, a fraud would have been impossible because we saw that on the picture that the two substances of the bread and the heart muscle tissue are intrinsically linked and attached to each other on the microscopic level. And so even if you have a team of fraudsters trying to get heart muscle tissue, how could you get it to be intrinsically intertwined with bread? That's not possible. So this cannot be explained by any current human instruments. So thus, I could say that science itself rules out any trickery or fraud in the case of Sokolka. So in summary, who can honestly believe that a conspiracy theory was at play in each of these 5 cases? That's very, very improbable. Unless one has an a priori bias against the supernatural, the rational position is to accept the overwhelming convergence of the facts. In these 5 cases, competent and independent scientists observed a consecrated host turning into suffering heart muscle tissue. And that itself is enough to prove the supernatural reality of these events. And each time, as we said, the blood tested was type AB, so very improbable. In face of such evidence, it seems irrational to deny the reality of the miracle. And so thank you for listening. In conclusion, we can say that the Eucharistic miracles really confirm the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and these miracles enable us to appreciate the reality and depth of Christ's sacrifice for us on the cross. And this is not trickstery or fabrication. It's a manifestation of the immense, infinite love of God for mankind in the Eucharistic sacrifice. Thank you. And if you want to go deeper, you can buy Serafini's book, A Cardiologist Examines Jesus.
All right, that was amazing. That was so good. I mean, it was even better than the presentation that you offered in your debate with Kevin. So I've got a couple objections. Okay, one of them, well, this isn't an objection. This is actually a sort of clarification. So earlier, like the title of this video is, new scientific evidence for the truth of Christianity. A lot of people are going to be watching this and be like, well, you're arguing for Catholicism in particular, right? But aren't there other denominations or other sects within Christianity that would still, be able to accept this evidence full right? So what about like Anglicanism? Could they accept these type of miracles, or what are your thoughts?
So I would say that these Eucharistic miracles are an argument in favor of the real presence of transubstantiation. So that would be compatible with any Christian denomination who holds to transubstantiation. So Catholicism, perhaps Eastern Orthodoxy, these miracles are compatible with Eastern Orthodoxy. Anglicanism, I don't know if they believe in transubstantiation. So I don't know if that would be compatible with their theology, but it's definitely not compatible with Protestant symbolic theology, or even the Calvinist spiritual presence. That wouldn't be compatible. Zwingli's symbolic presence not compatible. So that's specifically, I would say, evidence in favor of Orthodoxy or Catholicism. I would say specifically Catholicism, because to my knowledge, these kinds of miracles don't occur in Orthodoxy, but it's not strictly incompatible with Orthodoxy. I mean, an Orthodox wouldn't be necessarily moved to change his faith just because of these Eucharistic miracles. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
So one more sort of clarifying question, the doctrine, the sacrifice of the Mass is a pretty big doctrine for Catholics. I mean, James White and Joe Heschmeyer have debated that. Would you say, because like one of the interesting facts about this is that they found heart muscle tissue that was undergoing some kind of suffering, right? In every single case, they've found these in the 5 that you presented. So doesn't that lend credibility to the sacrifice of the Mass, that doctrine for Catholics?
Sure, I would say that definitely shows that the theology of the sacrifice of the Mass is also true and confirmed, and that wouldn't be compatible with Protestant theology that rejects sacrificial aspects of the Mass. I don't know if it shows, because there's a distinction to be made between propitiatory sacrifice and sacrifice of worship. I don't know if this directly proves propitiatory sacrifice. It does show that Christ is substantially present in the Eucharist. That I would say is true, and I would say that it does give a posteriori evidence of the sacrificial nature of the Mass. Sure, that seems perfectly fine. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and start wrapping things up. So is there anything that you'd like to address before we close out?
Well, I would encourage Christian to actually dig deep into the evidence from miracles. I know that in natural theology, philosophers usually appeal to arguments from reason, cosmological arguments, moral arguments, teleological, things like that. These are very interesting. I've written a book about these. And I would say that the argument from miracles has been very underestimated by academia and by philosophers who don't deal with the direct concrete evidence. They usually rehearse typical Humean slogans like it's always more probable that there is a fraud or things like that than that there is a true miracle. But they don't respond to the direct evidence. They don't dig deep into the mud of the concrete evidence. And I would say that there are very well attested miracles that almost give a knockdown blow to materialism and to naturalism. As you've shown on your channel, the Zaytun case is very, very well attested also. So if you do a Bayesian argument, I perhaps have the project of writing a book of a Bayesian argument in favor of miracles, where you take the best attested miracles in history and you combine so all the 5 Eucharistic miracles I've talked about in this presentation: the Zaytun case, Fatima, the Lord's miracles, the miracle in Lourdes in France where I live, the Padre Pio, the stigmatas, and you could do a hierarchy of like the top 20 or top 50 most evidenced miracles that have taken place in the world, and you put all that in a Bayesian
Can't forget
analysis.
Joseph of Cupertino.
Yeah, Saint Joseph of Cupertino, of course. There's the Juan Miguel Pellicer. Caleb Jackson talks about it. The leg that has grown up. The Bruce Van Natta case, where his intestine grows the triples. So there's very well attested medical miracles also. And so if you combine all that evidence in a Bayesian formula, at the end, you get a huge probability of them being authentic, or at least that materialism is very, very, very improbable. So that would be, to me, a future project in natural theology. that we could move forward in arguing for the truth of Christianity through the argument from miracles. And I think that's a solid argument, more than some people in academia today realize it.
Yeah, no, I think that's where things are actually going to head pretty soon. So I have a little bit of inside knowledge on that, but it should start getting some more light here in the coming years. But Matthew, it's been great to talk with you. I mean, there's probably a lot more that we could get into, specifically with respect to these Eucharistic miracles. But yeah, I mean, I'm so impressed with a bunch of things, like the miracles themselves, but I'm also really impressed with your research. Like, you've gone so deep into these. And so I just really appreciate you bringing all the information that you've researched to the audience today. And yeah, I want to know what the audience thinks. I want to know what you guys think about this. Let me know in the comments if you're convinced by Matthew's presentation, or if you think, if you're still skeptical, if you've got some objections, drop them in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next Capturing Christianity video. See you guys later.